Teacher pretends to leave the classroom and can't believe what the bullied student does next. The chalk scraped against the blackboard. A steady rhythm, like the ticking of an old clock. Each line Darius wrote seemed carved out of him, pulled from some unseen wound. The bullies, grinning only moments earlier, now stared in uneasy silence. Callahan Mercer, hidden just beyond the cracked door, felt his pulse rise with every word that appeared. This wasn't an ordinary outpouring. The poem had structure. Tight stanzas, deliberate enjambments, a rhythm both mournful and unyielding. The room shifted. Rain drummed against the windows, but the sound was swallowed by the cadence of chalk. You laugh at scars you've never earned, spit at shadows you'll never chase. But you don't know the hollow rooms, where silence keeps its face. Callahan's breath caught. He knew those lines, or at least he knew their essence. Too close to something he had once penned in a midnight haze after his younger brother's funeral. He remembered the ink smearing as his tears fell. Remembered crumpling the letter, hiding it in a drawer he never opened again. But how could a 17-year-old boy know words Callahan had buried in grief? The classroom froze. Even Marcus Heller, the ringleader with broad shoulders and a permanent smirk, couldn't muster a taunt. His lips parted, but no sound came. Darius set the chalk down. His hand trembled for just a second. Then he folded it behind his back. His voice, when it came, was soft, but unflinching. You think I don't know power. You think I don't know loss. The words echoed the poem, but his eyes, dark, blazing defiant, carried more than syllables. They carried years. No one laughed. A chair creaked in the middle row, but the sound died fast. Marcus shifted, trying to reassert himself. What is this supposed to be? You think anyone cares about your scribbles? Darius tilted his head. If you weren't scared, you'd still be laughing. That cut sharper than any rhyme. Marcus flushed. His jaw worked, but nothing came out. For a long moment, the only sound was rain against the glass. Callahan's throat felt tight. He had come to test a theory, to see whether leaving the room would reveal the ugly truth of his students. What he found was uglier, and yet astonishingly beautiful. Darius turned, preparing to walk back to his seat, but his eyes flicked to the door, just a flicker, quick enough to raise suspicion. Did the boy know he was being watched? The thought unsettled him. The bell rang shrill and sudden. Students jolted, chairs scraped. Some whispered nervously as they gathered their bags, throwing quick glances at the poem still sprawled across the board. Nobody dared erase it. Darius didn't move at first. Then he slipped back to his seat, collected a battered notebook, and left without a word. Callahan stayed in the hall, hidden in the shadow of a trophy case, his heart thudding against his ribs. He should have stepped in. He should have stopped it before it went so far, but he hadn't. Now he was left with too many questions. Later that evening, long after the hallways had emptied, and the janitor's mop echoed against the tiles, Callahan sat alone at his desk. The chalkboard still carried Darius's words. He hadn't erased them. He couldn't. He ran his hand across his face, remembering the poem he himself had written years ago. Different words, but the same grief-stricken rhythm. His brother Evan, gone too young. A motorcycle accident on a rain-slick road. Callahan had been 25, just starting his teaching career, and suddenly without the only sibling who truly understood him. He had written letters back then, late at night, never sending them, just trying to breathe through ink. One of those letters contained nearly identical imagery. Shadows, hollow rooms, silence with a face. Nobody had ever read it, not even his mother. So how had Darius written something so close? A knock startled him. "Mr. Mercer, you still here?" It was Janice Bowen, the history teacher, across the hall. He cleared his throat. "Yeah, just grading." She stepped inside, glanced at the chalkboard. "That's new? One of yours?" Callahan shook his head. Students. Her brows rose. Really, that's intense. He nodded. Yeah. Janice hesitated, then shrugged. Well, don't stay too late. These kids will drain you dry if you let them. When she left, the silence thickened again. Callahan pulled open a desk drawer. His fingers brushed the edge of an old folded sheet of paper. The ink was faded, but the words still carried weight. He unfolded it slowly, heart pounding. Silence wears a face. It follows me into empty rooms. My brother's laughter is gone, but the echo won't stop. He swallowed hard. Darius's poem wasn't identical, but it was close enough to feel like theft or fate. He sat back in his chair, staring at the board, staring at the letter, wondering if there was any rational explanation. Maybe coincidence, maybe a teenager with a sharp mind, and access to the same metaphors every grieving person stumbled into. But deep down, Callahan knew. It wasn't coincidence. It felt like something else. The door creaked again. He nearly jumped. A figure stood in the frame. Skinny, shoulders hunched. Notebook clutched tight. It was Darius. Callahan's pulse quickened. Mr. Mercer, the boy said quietly. Can we talk? Darius lingered in the doorway, as if unsure whether to step inside. The dim light from the overhead fixture stretched his shadow long across the floor. Outside, the rain slowed to a soft drizzle. It tapped like fingertips against the glass. His notebook was pressed so tightly to his chest that the edges curled in his grip. Callahan straightened. He slid the old letter back into the drawer, tried to steady his breathing, reminded himself this was just a student, a boy with a gift maybe, but still just a teenager. Yet something in Darius's eyes told him the conversation ahead wouldn't be ordinary. Come in, Callahan said. His voice was softer than he expected. Darius shuffled forward. He closed the door quietly behind him, stood near the front row of desks, not daring to sit. His gaze flicked briefly to the chalkboard. His poem still glowed faintly in the chalk dust. I didn't mean to. Cause trouble, he murmured. Callahan leaned back in his chair, folded his hands. You didn't cause trouble. You silenced it. For the first time that day, surprise flickered across Darius's face, then suspicion waiting for the catch. They'll just come back at me tomorrow. Maybe Callahan admitted. But today they saw something they didn't expect. You showed them power they couldn't touch. Darius shifted eyes downcast. He weighed the words, struggled with whether to believe them. Callahan waited, resisting the urge to press. He knew enough about students like Darius. Pushed too hard, and the walls only rose higher. Finally, the boy spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You recognized it, didn't you? The question struck Callahan like a bell. He swallowed, masking the jolt. Recognized what the poem? Darius lifted his gaze steady now. It wasn't mine. Not really. Not all of it. Callahan's chest tightened. Then where did you find it? Darius hesitated, opened his notebook, pages dense with handwriting, some neat, some frantic. He flipped halfway through, stopped at a folded slip of paper tucked between the leaves. With trembling fingers, he pulled it free, held it out. Callahan reached slowly, as if touching something fragile, unfolded the page. His breath caught. It was his letter, the very one he had written years ago, after Evan's death, the one he thought he had hidden in his desk drawer, his own handwriting, copied word for word. I found it, Darius said quickly, almost defensively. In the storage closet at the back of the library, there was a box of old stuff, essays, teacher notes, scraps. It was just there. I don't know how it got there. Callahan stared at the page. Memories crashed back like a tide. That night he had written it, alone in his apartment, pen shaking. He had never meant for anyone to see. Somehow, through years of moves and clean-outs, it slipped from his possession and into the world. Why did you copy it? He asked hoarsely. Darius shifted from foot to foot. Because it sounded like me. Like the way I feel when nobody listens. Like someone else had already lived it. He looked up, eyes burning. I thought maybe I wasn't crazy for hurting the way I do. The raw honesty hit Callahan harder than the discovery itself. He saw not a thief, but a boy clutching at words like a lifeline. Who did you lose? Callahan asked quietly. Darius's lips parted, pressed together again. His shoulders shook once. A small tremor. My brother, he said finally. Last year, gunfire, wrong place, wrong time. The words hung heavy between them. Callahan felt the room contract, the air thick with mirrored grief. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Evan, he whispered without meaning to. What my brother? His name was Evan. Motorcycle accident when I was 25. For a long moment neither spoke. The room itself held its breath. Then Darius sank into a chair, clutching his notebook. Whispered, so you know. Yes, Callahan said. I know. The silence that followed wasn't suffocating like before. It was different, heavy still but shared. Darius opened his notebook again, flipped through page after page of cramped handwriting. I write to him, he admitted. Every night, like he can read it wherever he is. It's the only thing that keeps me from... He trailed off, eyes wet. From what Callahan pressed gently. From disappearing, Darius finished. From being the shadow they think I am. Callahan exhaled, a tremor in his chest. He remembered those nights with his own pen, words as the only fragile bridge between life and despair. You're not a shadow, he said firmly. You're a voice. And voices, they demand to be heard. Darius's eyes flickered, uncertain whether to trust the affirmation. A sudden sound outside the slam of a locker, muffled laughter. It broke the fragile moment. Both looked toward the door. Tomorrow, Darius muttered bitterly. They'll start again. Maybe Callahan said. But this time, you won't be alone. The boy blinked, startled. What do you mean? Callahan closed the notebook, slid it back toward him. I'll help you. We'll find a way to make them see you for what you are. Not weak, not broken. Brilliant. For the first time, Darius let the corner of his mouth twitch upward, the faintest shadow of a smile. Mr. Mercer, he said quietly, if you do that, they'll come for you too. Callahan held his gaze. Steady as stone. Let them. Outside, the rain had stopped. In its place, crickets began their night song. Soft, persistent. Neither teacher nor student realized how far this moment would ripple, how many lives it would unsettle. But the first thread had been pulled, and the fabric of silence was beginning to tear. The next morning, the poem was still on the board. Chalk dust clung to the edges, the words slightly smudged, but intact. Students filed into the room with a hush that felt unnatural for teenagers. Usually first period was a noisy flood of chatter and groaning. Today, though, it was as if everyone had been rehearsing silence. Callahan stood at his desk, pretending to arrange papers. In truth, he was watching. He noted the glances darting toward the front, the whispered exchanges, the stolen looks at Darius. Marcus Heller entered last. His swagger was muted, jaw set, smirk gone. He glanced at the chalkboard once, then looked away quickly, as though the words might burn him. Callahan caught it. A shift, subtle but telling. The bullies weren't laughing anymore. They were unsettled, and unsettled students were unpredictable. When the bell rang, he cleared his throat. Take your seats. We'll start with something different today. He had planned to erase the poem before class began, but something in him resisted. He couldn't wipe away the words, not when they held so much weight. So instead he gestured toward the board. Who wants to talk about this? A ripple of tension passed through the room. Nobody raised a hand. Finally, a girl in the second row, Lydia Tran, sharp-eyed and soft-spoken, said, "It's kind of good." Kind of Callahan prompted gently. "It's powerful," she admitted. "It feels like someone really hurting, but also not giving up." Murmurs followed. A boy in the back added, "Yeah, it's like deep, not the usual cheesy stuff." Callahan let the silence stretch. His eyes flicked to Darius. The boy sat hunched as usual, notebook on his desk, eyes fixed downward. His stillness spoke volumes. Then Marcus snorted. "Come on." He copied it. Nobody here writes like that. A dangerous stillness filled the room. Callahan's gaze sharpened. Copied it from where Marcus shrugged. Tone dripping with disdain. Who knows? Probably from some website. Nobody's buying that it's his. Darius's head snapped up. His eyes locked on Marcus. For a moment, Callahan thought he might explode, but the boy simply whispered, "Say that again." Marcus shifted in his chair, caught off guard by the quiet intensity. "I'm just saying enough," Callahan cut in, his voice firm. "Accusing someone without proof isn't courage, Marcus. It's cowardice." The class stirred. Some students smirked. Others looked uneasy. Marcus clenched his jaw, but said nothing more. The period went on, but the air never returned to normal. The poem remained like a ghost in the room, haunting every glance, every half-whisper. By lunchtime, the whispers had spread. Students from other classes lingered by Callahan's door, peeking inside to see the infamous poem. A few scribbled lines into their own notebooks. Others posted blurry photos to social media. By the time Callahan checked his phone in the staff lounge, the lines had already begun circulating. Hashtags he didn't understand. "Your class went viral," Janice Bowen remarked, setting down her tray. "Congratulations, Poet Laureate." Callahan grimaced. That wasn't the plan. Nothing ever is with these kids. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Word is the principal's already caught wind. Some parents are asking if it's appropriate." "Appropriate," Callahan repeated. "You know how it is. Anything emotional or raw, someone thinks it's dangerous, especially when it mentions violence or loss." Callahan rubbed his temples. The last thing he wanted was for Darius's heartache to become fodder for gossip, let alone administrative scrutiny. "Keep an eye out," Janice warned. "The vultures circle quick around here." By the end of the day, the principal did call him in. Mrs. Rutledge. Trim, silver-haired, a reputation for running the school like a business. "I've had 3 parent emails already," she said, adjusting her glasses. "They want to know why a poem about grief and power struggles is up on the board for everyone to see." Callahan sat straight, because it was written by a student, and because it matters. Her brow furrowed. "Do you know which student?" Callahan hesitated. He could protect Darius by deflecting. But then what message would that send that his voice needed to stay hidden? "Yes," Callahan said carefully, "and I stand by leaving it there." Rutledge's lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Mercer, you know we encourage creativity, but sensitive material needs careful handling. If this escalates, I'll handle it," he cut in. "I take full responsibility." She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine, but tread carefully. We can't afford scandal." Scandal, the word tasted sour. That night Callahan sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee gone cold. His apartment was quiet, the city's hum faint beyond the window. He thought of Darius, the boy clutching his notebook like a shield. The fire in his eyes when Marcus accused him of theft. The parallels gnawed at him. He too had once scribbled in notebooks, desperate to hold himself together. He too had been mocked. When his grief spilled into the open, he remembered a night in college, standing in front of a classroom after sharing a poem about Evan. The silence that followed had felt like knives. Every cough, every shifting chair, a verdict weak, soft, too much. Now, watching Darius walk the same line, Callahan felt the old wound reopen. He opened his drawer, pulled out the letter again. His handwriting stared back. Raw, jagged. He thought of Darius finding it, copying it, carrying it like a torch. Maybe this was why he had become a teacher, to make sure no one else had to carry that torch alone. But he also knew something else. The storm had only begun. Because tomorrow, Marcus wouldn't stay quiet, and neither would the rest of the school. By Wednesday morning, the atmosphere at Westbridge High was electric with tension. Students clustered in knots in the hallways. They whispered. They traded phone screens to reread the now infamous poem. Some treated it with reverence, others with mockery. But everyone had an opinion. Darius couldn't walk down a corridor without eyes turning to follow him. He kept his head down, clutching his notebook, as though it might anchor him against the tide. His steps were measured. Careful. The murmurs followed anyway. That's him, right? I heard he stole it. Nah. My sister said the teacher defended him. Maybe it's real. At his locker, Marcus leaned casually against the door, arms crossed. His friends flanked him like shadows, their laughter thin and mean. Well, look who it is, Marcus drawled. Our resident Shakespeare. Tell me, Darius, how's it feel being famous for something you didn't even write? Darius froze. His knuckles whitened around the strap of his backpack. Move, he said quietly. Marcus tilted his head, grinning. Or what, you'll write another sob story. Maybe this time you'll rhyme it with pathetic. His friends snickered. The anger rose in Darius's chest. Sharp, suffocating. He wanted to lash out, but he could feel the weight of the hallway watching. Dozens of eyes, hungry for a scene. Enough. The voice cut through the noise like a blade. Callahan was there. Tall, steady, a folder tucked under his arm, his gaze locked on Marcus, unflinching. Step aside. For a second, Marcus faltered. Then he smirked, tossing his head. Relax, Mr. Mercer. We're just talking. Step aside. Callahan's voice was lower now. Firmer. Something in his tone made Marcus shift. He pushed off the locker with exaggerated nonchalance, motioning for his friends to follow. Whatever. Not worth it. But his eyes flicked to Darius one last time, promising the matter wasn't over. The crowd dispersed slowly, disappointed by the lack of fireworks. Darius stared at the floor, cheeks burning. You okay? Callahan asked quietly. Darius gave a small nod, but his voice betrayed him. They won't stop. I know, Callahan admitted, but neither will we. That afternoon an assembly was called, officially for Student Creativity Showcase. But everyone knew what it was about. Rumors swirled until the auditorium filled with restless teenagers. Teachers lined the edges, their faces taut. On stage, Principal Rutledge stood at the podium, her voice calm but clipped. Today, we want to celebrate the talent and courage of our students. Poetry, music, storytelling. These are the ways we make sense of our world. Callahan sat in the front row with the English department, his heart hammering. He hadn't been told who would perform, but he had a sinking suspicion. When Rutledge called Darius's name, the room erupted, half with cheers, half with mocking laughter. Darius walked slowly to the stage, notebook in hand, his face unreadable. He stood at the microphone, silence stretching out. For a moment, it seemed he might bolt. Then he opened the notebook. This one, he said softly, is for my brother. The auditorium quieted. Even Marcus, slouched in the back row, straightened slightly. Darius began to read. His voice shook at first, then steadied. The poem was raw, unflinching. He spoke of street corners and sirens, of empty chairs at dinner tables, of a boy who never came home. The words weren't polished, but they were alive, burning with grief, burning with defiance. Every syllable felt like a wound opening, but also like a blade cutting through chains. When he finished, the silence was total. A single cough echoed, then faded, slowly, cautiously. Hands began to clap. First Lydia, then others. Within seconds the applause swelled, filling the auditorium like thunder. Darius lowered his head, clutching his notebook, overwhelmed, but not everyone clapped. From the back, Marcus's voice rang out. Still stolen, the applause faltered. Heads turned. The room teetered between admiration and doubt. Darius's shoulders stiffened. He looked out at the sea of faces, some shining with respect, others narrowed with suspicion. His throat worked, but no words came. Then Callahan stood. "Enough," he said firmly, his voice carrying across the room. "You want proof." The first time I heard Darius's words, I recognized them, because they echoed something I wrote years ago, after my own brother died. He didn't steal it, he felt it. That's what makes poetry real. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Students glanced at each other, murmuring. A teacher exposing something so personal was unheard of. Callahan stepped forward, eyes locked on Marcus. "You mock what you don't understand, but grief doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to anyone who's lived it." And today, Darius gave it a voice. The auditorium shifted. More applause rose. Louder this time, unwavering. Marcus's face flushed crimson. He sank into his seat, lips pressed tight. Beaten not by fists, but by words he couldn't match. Darius's chest rose and fell quickly. He turned toward Callahan, and for the first time, a genuine grateful smile flickered across his face. But Callahan knew the battle wasn't truly won. Words had power, yes, but words also carried consequences, and by speaking out, both he and Darius had painted targets on their backs. The question was no longer whether the truth would come out, it was how much it would cost them. When it did, the assembly fractured the school into factions. By the next day, half the student body seemed to orbit around Darius. Curious, admiring, some even protective. The other half, emboldened by Marcus's whisper campaign, muttered "faker" under their breath whenever he passed. The line was drawn. Everyone chose a side. Callahan felt the ripple effect in the faculty lounge too. A few colleagues offered nods of solidarity. Others questioned his judgment. It was inappropriate, one muttered by the coffee machine. Sharing personal grief with students reckless. He didn't respond. He'd already decided silence was the only shield he had left. But Darius had no such shield. At lunch, a carton of milk exploded across his tray. His notebook nearly slipped into the spill, saved only by Lydia's quick hands. She shot Marcus's table a glare sharp enough to cut. "Pathetic," she hissed. Later, graffiti bloomed on Darius's locker. "Copycat. Fraud." He stood staring at it until Callahan appeared with a roll of paper towels. "Don't," Callahan said softly when Darius reached to scrub. "It's not yours to erase." For the first time, Darius let his anger spill past the dam. "You think this helps? You stood up for me, now I'm paying for it. Every day, every hallway. You don't get it, Mr. Mercer. You go home to quiet. I go home to nothing." The words landed like blows. Callahan wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because Darius was right. His own apartment, cluttered with old books and stale coffee cups, was at least free of eyes that wanted him broken. That night, Callahan sat alone at his desk. He stared at the poem Darius had written on the board. The rhythm, the jagged pain, the unmistakable echo of his own hidden letter. It gnawed at him. He pulled out the original tucked deep in a drawer. The lines weren't identical, but the marrow was the same. Two voices across time, bound by the same wound. And suddenly, he knew. This wasn't coincidence. The next day he asked Darius to stay, after class. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, striping the desks with pale gold. "I need to ask you something," Callahan began, voice careful. That poem, how did you write it? Where did it come from? Darius shrugged, defensive. I just wrote. I don't steal. I believe you. Callahan's hand shook as he unfolded the faded page. But I wrote this. Years ago. After my brother's death. And your words, Darius, they mirror mine in ways no one else could know. Darius froze. His eyes darted from the page to Callahan's face. Suspicion and fear warred in his gaze. Then quietly. My brother, he used to carry a folder. Found it after he didn't come home. Had poems inside, some signed CM. I thought they were his. The air between them thickened. Callahan's throat closed. Your brother's name, he whispered, though he already knew. Devon Cole. Silence. The pieces slammed into place. Devon, the boy who'd sat in Callahan's evening writing workshop a decade ago. The one who dropped out after tragedy swallowed his family. The boy Callahan had mentored briefly, then lost track of. The boy who must have kept his words, and now his younger brother stood before him carrying those words like a legacy. Callahan's chest ached. Darius, your brother and I, we shared those pages. They weren't stolen, they were passed down, and you've made them your own. For the first time, Darius's mask cracked. His lip trembled, his shoulders sagged. So I'm not a fraud. No, Callahan said, voice steady. You're an heir. The revelation bound them together in ways neither fully understood yet. But it also lit a fuse. If Marcus ever uncovered this connection, he'd twist it into a weapon sharper than any knife. And judging by the glint in Marcus's eyes across the cafeteria that afternoon, he already smelled blood. It happened on a Thursday. The auditorium was crammed for the inter-school debate finals. Callahan had taken his usual seat along the side wall, eyes scanning the rows until he found Darius nervous but steady, clutching a folded paper in his lap. Marcus, of course, sat near the front, grinning like a wolf with a secret. The program rolled along until Principal Reddick called for a showcase of original student work. Darius's name was announced. A ripple of whispers spread, some supportive, others mocking. He rose anyway, hands tight on the page. But before he reached the microphone, Marcus was already there. He tapped it twice, leaning in with mock solemnity. Before we hear Darius's performance, he drawled, maybe you all should know he didn't write half his stuff. He copies from old notebooks, from dead people. Gasps cut through the air. Teachers shot to their feet, but the damage was done. Marcus pulled a crumpled photocopy from his folder, waving it like a trophy. The exact same words. Found them in his brother's junk. Fraud. Darius froze mid-step, his face drained. Laughter erupted from a few corners, cruel and sharp. Others shifted uneasily, not sure where to stand. Callahan surged forward. Enough. His voice cracked like thunder. He took the stage, snatching the paper from Marcus's hand. You want the truth? Here it is. Those words were mine, written years ago, shared with Darius's late brother. They weren't stolen, they were passed down, legacy, not theft. The auditorium buzzed with confusion. Marcus sneered. So you're admitting you're feeding him lines? Pathetic. Callahan's chest heaved. No, I'm saying the opposite. Darius took fragments of grief that didn't belong to him and forged them into something new. He didn't plagiarize, he transformed, and that's more than you've ever done with your voice, Marcus. The silence that followed was volcanic. Then slowly Darius stepped to the mic. His hands still shook, but his voice was clear. I don't care what you believe, he said. I lost my brother. I found his pages. I wrote my own. If you call that fraud, fine. But it saved me. Writing saved me. The words cracked open, something raw in the crowd. A few clapped, tentative at first, then louder. Lydia stood and started a cheer. Teachers moved to escort Marcus off the stage, his smirk finally faltering under the weight of the shifting room. And in that fragile, perilous moment, Darius wasn't invisible anymore. But Callahan knew the war wasn't won. Respect, once poisoned, was slow to heal. The confrontation had exposed truth, but also painted new targets on both their backs. Yet for the first time, they weren't standing alone. In the days after the auditorium showdown, the school felt different. Whispers still trailed Darius in the halls, but they carried less venom. Some nodded at him now, awkward but sincere, as if acknowledging a truth they couldn't quite name. Marcus had been suspended for his outburst, yet Callahan knew that shadows of cruelty rarely disappeared. They only regrouped. But for once, Darius walked straighter. Callahan watched him from the doorway of room 213 one afternoon, the classroom now a quiet haven where Darius lingered long after the final bell. He sat at a desk, scribbling into a new notebook his own, fresh and unmarked by anyone else's ghosts. "You're still here," Callahan said softly. Darius smirked without looking up. "Guess I've got detention with my own thoughts." Callahan chuckled, but then his voice steadied. "What you did on that stage, it mattered. Not just for you. For me, too." Darius closed the notebook. His eyes searched Callahan's face. "You think my brother would have been proud?" The question carved the air between them. Callahan swallowed the ache in his chest. "I know he would. Devon never stopped writing because he believed words could keep him alive. And through you, they do." For the first time, Darius let himself smile without irony. It was small, but it reached his eyes. That spring, the school published its annual literary magazine. The cover bore a stark black feather. On the first page was Darius's poem, not Callahan's, not Devon's, but his own. Beneath the title, a simple dedication for those who left too soon and those who stayed to carry the weight. The night it was unveiled, Callahan stood in the back of the auditorium again, watching as students flipped through the pages. Lydia clapped him on the shoulder, whispering, "He did it." And he had. Darius approached the podium taller, somehow steadier, his voice carried through the hall, no longer trembling. "I used to think I was just surviving," he said. "But maybe survival is just the first draft." "This," he held up the book. "This is the revision." The applause was real this time. Callahan felt something loosen in his chest, like a knot finally untied. He would still return home to an empty apartment, still carry the scars of his brother's death. But seeing Darius claim his voice, seeing grief alchemized into creation, made the silence less cruel. When the lights dimmed and students filed out, Darius lingered at the stage door. "Mr. Mercer," he said, notebook tucked under his arm, "thanks for, not letting me disappear." Callahan's answer was simple. "You did that yourself." Outside, night draped itself over the campus, but for the first time in a long while, both teacher and student stepped into it, carrying light. And though the world would keep testing them, they understood now that their words, scarred, imperfect, but alive, would not be silenced again. As the auditorium emptied and the lights dimmed, I can't help but wonder how many of us carry unspoken grief. Words we're afraid to release or truths we hide from the world. Darius found his voice, but not without struggle. Sometimes it's the quiet battles that shape us the most. Have you ever discovered strength in the darkest moments, or seen someone turn pain into power in a way that changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, so you won't miss the next journey of courage, resilience, and unexpected brilliance. Thanks for staying till the end. See you in the next one.